One of the most enduring themes in religious art, I'm sure many of you have been exposed to these things, is pictures of the Madonna with the child. This, of course, is echoed by the great prophecy of Isaiah that the virgin will be with child, bear a son. The original version of that was that a young woman would conceive and bear a son, which doesn't sound to be much of a prophecy because young women bear children every day. But about 500 years later, the Bible, the Old Testament, was translated into Greek, and the word virgin was used. So we can see how God worked through the development of the Bible. The word Parthenos. Some of you may be familiar with Athens, Greece. There's a famous building called the Parthenon, which means the building that housed the virgin that guarded this eternal flame. So the Parthenos of the virgin would bear a child. And of course, St. Matthew looks at that prophecy and understands that that is fulfilled in Our Lady. Very much so, quite literally. Not just a young woman bearing a child, but a virgin conceiving a child. In Jewish customs of the day for marriage, people were betrothed to each other, or we would say married, but they didn't actually cohabitate for about a year. Each partner stayed at home with his parents, and then when the year was over, the two would come together. The issue here was that Mary was visited by the angel during this period before the cohabitation. So Joseph was her husband. And of course, the famous question that Our Lady directed to the angel was, well, how can this be? I do not know man, meaning, at least I'm not yet cohabitated. Then the angel said, well, the power of the Most High will overshadow you. And the holy offspring to be born will be called Son of the Most High. Now, mind you, what happened is given to us in a very picturesque form. St. Luke gives us the scene of the angel visiting Our Lady. But in reality, it was the kind of thing that could not really be expressed in words, because it was the result of a prayer experience that Mary had. A very sublime experience, which resulted in her agreement to conceiving Jesus virginally. This is called the Annunciation, the announcement of God to our Blessed Virgin, who was representing the entire human race. Her yes was made on our behalf. She became the doorway for the entry of God into His own creation. But she was possessing a free will. She had her own mind. She wasn't simply someone going along with the program blindly. Sometimes people think that faith means we don't think anymore. That's not faith, that's fundamentalism. Faith requires people thinking. In fact, it's better, it's more authentic faith when we are responsible agents. We're using our minds. There's nothing wrong with asking questions, as long as the questions are sincere, legitimate questions, not simply questions motivated by cynicism, which sometimes happens, or skepticism, terrible skepticism. Our Lady was not a cynic or a skeptic. She was a very authentic believer in God. She was a very holy woman. She allowed the Lord into the world through her capacity as a mother. All women are mothers in some way. It might be spiritual motherhood. This great gift of maternity was employed by the Lord to bring into the world our Savior. Now, St. Joseph was her husband, and he didn't quite understand or couldn't quite deal with this immediately. St. Matthew tells us that Joseph had a dream to the effect that the Lord wanted him to retain Mary as his wife, that it would be in the plan of God for him to do so. The thing is that God did not appear to Joseph. It was in a dream. And I'm not suggesting that everything that occurs to people in dreams should be taken seriously, because dreams can be very disjointed and kind of strange. But if a person has a deep-seated, unresolved issue, it may come up in some fashion in a dream. St. Joseph had this kind of dream. But Joseph apparently took it to prayer, thought about it, and responded to God by, in fact, keeping Mary as his wife. Now, it was not a matter of Joseph suspecting Mary of infidelity, because he knew that she was quite impeccable, a woman of great character. But it was more along the lines of, how can I possibly have someone such as Mary to be my wife? I am not worthy of this holy one. Yet, of course, if he had left her, she would have been subject to public humiliation. And how would she have been supported in the same with the child? So we can see that Joseph was obedient to God. It was not easy for him. He didn't know all the answers. But his yes and Mary's yes opened the door to the existence of the Holy Family and the home in which Jesus would be raised. Sometimes people think that Jesus was a finished product. He came down from heaven. He really wasn't. He had to have his humanity developed. Mother and his foster father were very instrumental in developing Jesus' humanity. For example, Jesus had to learn how to speak. He didn't know how to speak. The word infant means someone who can't speak because the person is too small. So Jesus learned how to speak from his parents. And other capacities, powers that go along, and responsibilities that go along with being human. God entrusted himself to two of his own creatures to develop the humanity of his Son. So we see what great gifts parents are for their children and really for the world, because each child has some sort of mission to perform in the world. Jesus' mission, of course, was to save the world. And indeed, he derived so much from his parents, their example, their love, their formation. When our Blessed Lady was about 9 months pregnant, she had to leave home with Joseph to go to Bethlehem. Bethlehem is about a 2-hour drive from Nazareth. Of course, in those days, their transportation was primitive. So we see a woman who's about to give birth have to leave her comforts of home, and with her husband travel down to a town where they probably had not visited before, and perform the responsibilities incumbent upon them for the census that was being required by the Roman government. Once in Bethlehem, which was a long, arduous trip, there was no place to give birth to Jesus. We know the story. So they had to give birth to Jesus in a place fit for animals. Not of their own choosing, but they had no other recourse. There was no room at the inn. The famous line, "We have no room here." Jesus was born in a place that was connected really with poverty. But he was born, and his parents took care of him. Then, shortly thereafter, the local king, Herod, wanted to kill Jesus. So imagine a woman giving birth, the government wanting to come in and capture the child, put him to death. Sounds very horrifying. These kind of things have happened. In fact, a similar thing happens today in China with the so-called one-child policy that the government enforces on people by imposing on people, forcing abortions on people who violate this policy. It's terrible. I would ask everybody to pray for the conversion of people in power who have, in some cases, very limited appreciation for people, for children, for families. We need families. We need children. We have no future without families. We need good families. King Herod didn't care. King Herod was only concerned about his power. When Mary and Joseph and the baby had to flee Egypt, which was a foreign land. So just after childbirth, which is not a good time again for traveling, I'm sure, especially for the mother, they had to leave to another country. When the coast was clear, then they went back to their home, which was Nazareth. I've been to Nazareth, and Nazareth has a church dedicated to the Annunciation. And underneath the floor of the church, in the lower church, is an altar. And there's a sign on the altar that says, "Here the Word was made flesh. The Word was God. The Word entered the world through agency of a woman who cooperated with the will of God." People today very often complain that the world is a mess. It is. That many people live godless lives. Many people do. But the thing is, God, in many ways, depends upon us to bring Him and His influence into the world. We must be humble people, prayerful people. We must be willing to live lives of faith. We must be willing to be like Mary and Joseph, who, if they had not been the people they were, would not have allowed God to send His Son into the world. So today, we're obviously right on the cusp of the Christmas season. We talk about Jesus, we celebrate Him. We also need to give credit to His parents, who were God-fearing, dedicated people, who took the risk, suffered many hardships, but did what they needed to do to make Jesus a reality.